What's up, everybody, and welcome to another edition of High Mythology, the show where we get higher than the tippy top of the Snow Queen's castle and tell you guys silly stories from mythology and folklore. Tonight, we are going to be bringing you a classic Danish story.
Sorry.
Yeah, I wonder if there's any cream cheese on the Danish.
That's a good hash brown.
Yeah. We'll be doing the Snow Queen. Yeah, good old story. Inspiration for a movie about it being cold.
Mm-hmm.
Can't remember what it's called. Chili?
Yeah, something like that.
Chili? Yeah, so without further ado, Kimbo, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Thank you. Huge fan of Frozen. Had to,
Ice cold.
Had to fucking find out its origins.
Mm-hmm. The icy origins.
Yeah. It's not what I thought.
Yeah.
I don't even know how the fuck they get frozen into this, man.
Yeah. They just came up with it. They're like, you know what? Let's throw Hans some credit.
For real. It's you'll see. It's chapter 1. Chapter 1.
Chapter 1.
Which, by the way, all the chapters' names are kind of odd. It is. Which describes a looking glass and its broken fragments. Before we start this story, there is a side story we gotta know first. Otherwise, shit don't make sense. There was once a very wicked hobgoblin, and he was the most mischievous of all sprites, whatever. For he was a real demon.
He was a real demon, that guy.
Yeah. One day, when he was in a merry mood, he made a looking glass which had the power of making everything good or beautiful that was reflected in it shrink to almost nothing, while everything that was worthless and bad was magnified so it looked 10 times worse than it really was. The most lovely landscapes appeared like boiled spinach, and all people became hideous and looked as if they stood on their heads and had no bodies. Their countenances were so disordered that no one could recognize them, and even one freckle on the face appeared to spread all over the whole nose and the mouth. The demon said that this was very amusing. When a good or holy thought passed through the mind of anyone, a wrinkle was seen in a mirror, and then the demon would laugh at his cunning invention.
Ha ha!
So he's an asshole.
Yeah.
Cool.
Gotcha, suckers.
All who went to the demon's school, for he kept a school, talked everywhere. Talked everywhere of the wonders that they had seen and declared that people could now, for the first time, see what the world and its inhabitants were really like. They carried the glass about everywhere, till at last there was not a land nor people who had not been looked at through this disordered mirror. They wanted even to fly with it up to heaven to see the angels, but the higher they flew, the more slippery the glass became, and they could scarcely hold it. At last it slipped from their hands and fell to the earth and was broken into a million pieces. But now, the looking glass caused even more unhappiness more than ever.
Aww.
For some of the fragments were not so large as a grain of sand, and they flew about in the world in every country. And when one of these tiny little atoms flew into a person's eye, it got stuck there, unknown to himself from the moment he viewed everything the wrong way.
Aww.
He could see only the worst side of what he looked at, for even the smallest fragment retained the same power of which beheld that whole mirror. That sucks.
That does suck. just all of
so
a
you
sudden,
just wake up and you're just a
down
dick.
The street, you're just like, ow, what's in my eye? Oh, God.
Fuck life.
Fuck life.
The world. Everything sucks.
Why does everything look like spinach?
So he immediately goes from a child to adolescence. That's pretty much what I'm doing. Some people even got a splinter of the looking glass in their hearts, and this was terrible, for in their hearts became cold and hard like a lump of ice. We call them Karens.
Do you or someone you know suffering from a speck of looking glass in the heart? There might be a lawsuit for you.
A few of these pieces were so large that they could be used as window panes, For it would have been it would have been a sad thing indeed to look out at our friends through them. Other pieces were made into spectacles, and this was dreadful, for those who wore them could see nothing either rightly or justly. And at all this the wicked demon laughed till his sides shook to see the mischief he had done. There is still a number of these fragments of glass floating about in the air, and now we shall hear what happens to one of them.
Oh.
Chapter 2.
You would think that there would be a point where they would not use the shitty glass anymore.
I mean, I paid $8 for that. That's like $1,000 back then.
It's the glass farmers, man. They're the ones making all the money.
You know what I mean? Like, minimum wage was 2 lashings a day.
Yeah.
What do you mean you get pay me? 2 lashings and a penny?
Yeah, I'll take a shard of this demon glass. Why not? Maybe it'll help me get through demon school.
Exactly. Chapter 2. A little boy and a little girl. In a large town full of houses and people, there is not a lot of room for everyone to have even the littlest garden.
Oh.
Most people are obliged to content themselves with a few flowers in flower pots. In one of these large towns lived 2 poor children who had a garden so much larger and better than the few flower pots. They were not brother and sister, but they loved each other almost as if they had been. Their parents lived opposite of each other in 2 garrets, where the roofs of neighboring houses nearly joined each other, and the water pipe that ran between them. In each roof was a little window, so that anyone could step across the gutter from one window to the other. The parents of each of these children had large wooden boxes in which they cultivated kitchen vegetables for their own use.
Smart.
And each box was a little rose bush which grew luxuriantly. After a while, the parents decided to place these 2 boxes across the water pipe so that they had reached from one window to the other and looked like 2 banks of flowers. Sweet peas dropped over the boxes, and the rose bushes shot forth large branches, which were trained about the windows and clustered together almost like a triumphal arch of leaves and flowers.
That is a description right there.
Yeah, but you got the visual of it, right?
Yeah. Got all that visual.
So it's not that detailed, but I guess the rose bushes.
I know the rose bushes
For no
where they
reason.
drop all the detail. Hold on, give me 10 minutes to speak upon my roses.
The boxes were very high, and the children knew that they must not climb upon them without permission. But they often had to leave to step out and sit upon their little stools under the rose bush or play quietly together. In the winter, all this pleasure came to an end, for the windows were sometimes quite frozen over.
Aww.
But they would warm copper pennies on the stove and hold the warm pennies against the frozen panes. Then there would soon be a little round hole in which they could peep, and the soft bright lights, or the soft bright eyes of the little boy and the girl would sparkle through the holes at each other as they looked at each other.
That's just creepy.
Their names were Kay and Gerda.
Kay and Gerda.
Kay's a little boy, Gerda, a little girl.
Gerda.
In the summer, they could be together with one jump from the window. But in the winter, they had to go up and down the long staircases and go out through the snow before they could meet.
Oh.
One day, when it was snowing, Kay's grandmother said to Kay, "See, there are all the white bees swarming." The little boy Kay asked,
"Have they a queen bee?"
For he knew that the real bees always had a queen. His grandmother says, "I'm sure they do. She is flying there with the swarm in the thickest. She is the largest of them all, and never remains on the earth, but flies up to the dark clouds. Often at midnight she flies through the streets of the town and breathes her icy breath upon the windows. Then the ice freezes upon the plains into the wonderful forms that look like flowers and castles." The children looked at each other and knew it must be true.
Grandma has to be off her meds again.
She probably is. It's okay.
Yeah.
I don't know if she could have afforded them in the first place. The children looked at each other and knew that it must be true. And Kay says,
"Yes, I have seen them."
when Gerda asked, "Can the Snow Queen come in here?" Kay says,
Let her come. I'll put her on the warm stove and then she'll melt.
The grandmother soothed his hair and told him more stories. The same evening, when little Kay was at home, half undressed, he climbed upon the chair by the window and peeped through the little round hole. A few flakes of snow were falling, and one of them, rather larger than the rest, alighted on the edge of one of the flower boxes. Strange to say, the snowflake grew larger and larger until at last it formed that of a woman dressed in garments of white gauze, which looked like 1,000,000 starry snowflakes linked together.
Oh.
She was fair and beautiful, but made of ice, glittering, dazzling ice. Still, she was alive, and her eyes sparkled like bright stars through...
Let it go!
Hold on. This is fucking with me. My microphone came down.
Catastrophe.
Sorry. It was just going to get louder until I fixed it. Okay. Still she was alive, and her eyes sparkled like the bright stars, though there were neither peace nor rest in them. She nodded towards the window and waved her hand, and the little boy was frightened and sprang from the chair. And at that same moment it seemed as if a large bird flew by the window. On the following day there was a clear frost, and very soon came the spring. The sun shone, the young green leaves burst forth, and the swallows built their nests. Windows were opened, and the children sat once more in the garden on the roof, high above all the other rooms. How beautifully the roses bloomed in the summer.
How beautifully the luxurious, magnificent roses that
Look at
glistened in
them.
the sun.
The little girl had learned a hymn in which roses were spoken of, and she thought of her own roses, and she sang the hymn to the little boy, and he sang too.
Ah.
They sang,
Roses bloom and fade away. The Christ child shall abide always. Blessed are we, his face to see, and ever little children be.
solo.
Solo.
Sorry. I forgot the voice I was going to do.
You just abandoned me on that one. They sang it together, and she looks right at me like, okay, I guess I'm doing this.
I just wanted to see who did it. But anyway. Then the little ones held each other by the hand and kissed the roses and looked at the bright sunshine and spoke to it as if the Christ child were really there. Those were the glorious summer days.
Those were the glorious summer days. Beneath my magnificent rose bush, standing 4 feet tall. Thorns ever so lightly protruding out of her stems.
How beautiful and fresh it was out amongst the rose bushes.
The magnificent, luxurious rose bushes.
Which seemed as if they would never leave off blooming. Wow.
Yeah, all about those rose bushes.
One day, Kay and Gerda sat looking at a book of pictures of animals and birds. Just then, as the clock in the church tower struck 12, Kay said,
"Oh, something has struck my heart. And there is certainly something in my fucking eye."
The little girl put her arm around his neck and looked into his eye, but she could see nothing. Kay said,
"I believe it's gone. I think I got it."
But it was not gone, and it was one of those bits of looking glass, the magic mirror in which we have spoken. The ugly glass which made everything great and good appear ugly and small, while everything that was wicked and bad came more visible, and every little fault he could plainly see. Poor little Kay had also received a small splinter into his heart, which was very quickly turned into a lump of ice. He felt no more pain, but the glass was still there, and at last he said,
"Why do you cry? Makes you look ugly. There's nothing the matter with me now. Oh, Phewie. That rose is worm-eaten, and this one is crooked. And they're ugly roses, just stupid, ugly roses that get more description than we do."
And then he kicked the box with his foot and pulled off the 2 roses. Gerda cried, "Why, Kay? What are you doing?"
"Fuck your rose bush."
And when he saw how grieved she was, he tore off another rose and jumped through his own window away from sweet little Gerda. Afterwards, she brought out the picture book and he said,
"It's only fit for babies and long clothes. I wear short clothes."
And when grandmother told her stories, he would interrupt her with, "But," or sometimes when he could manage it, he would get behind her chair, put on a pair of spectacles, and imitate her very cleverly to make all the people laugh. By and by, he began to mimic the speech and gain of persons on the street. All that was particular or disagreeable in a person he would imitate directly, and people would say, "That boy will be very clever. He has a remarkable genius." But it was the piece of glass in his eye and the coldness in his heart that made him act like this. He would even tease little Gerda, who loved him with all her heart. Oh, Dick.
He's just roasting everybody.
For real. His games were quite different. They were not so childlike.
Who wants to play Russian roulette, bitches?
One winter's day, when it snowed, he brought out a burning glass. Then, holding out the skirt of his blue coat, let the snowflakes fall upon it. Kay said to Gerda,
"Look in this glass, Gerda."
She did, and she saw how every flake of snow was magnified and looked like a beautiful flower or a glittering star. Kay continued to say,
"Is it not clever? Much more interesting looking than real fucking flowers. There's not a single fault in it. The snowflakes are perfect until they begin to melt."
Soon after, Kay made his appearance in a large, thick gloves with his sled at his back, and he called upstairs to Gerda,
"I've got to go to the great square where the other boys play and ride."
And away he went.
"Playing with my boys. Guys' night, Gerda."
In the great square, the boldest amongst the boys would often tie their sleighs to the wagons of the country people so that they could get a ride. This was capital.
Capital.
But while they were all amusing themselves, and Kay with them, a great sleigh came by, and it was painted white, and in it sat someone wrapped in rough white fur and wearing a white cap. The sleigh drove twice around the square, and Kay fastened his little sleigh to it, so that when it went away, he went with it. It went faster and faster right through the next street, and the person who drove turned around and nodded pleasantly to Kay as if they were well acquainted with one another.
Yep.
But whenever Kay wished to loosen his little sleigh, the driver turned and nodded as if to signify that he was to stay. So Kay sat still, and they drove out through the town gate. That is not
never let him take you to a second
like
location.
Fucking pedophile, man. Then the snow began to fall so heavily that the little boy could not see a hand's beneath it before him.
A hand's breadth before him.
Breadth.
Breadth.
See what I mean? I missed one word. Okay, clearly it was late night.
Breadth.
Yeah. I guess a hand's breadth before him. But they drove on. He suddenly loosened the cords so that the large sleigh might go on without him. But it was of no use. His little carriage held fast, and away they went like the wind. Then he called out loudly, but nobody heard him. While the snow beat upon him and the sleigh flew onward, every now and then it gave a jump, as if they were going over hedges and ditches. The boy was frightened and tried to say a prayer, but he could remember nothing but the multiplication table.
Yeah. What was that prayer? 2 times 2.
Jesus.
That wasn't it.
I almost started reading the same paragraph again, sorry. The snowflakes became larger and larger till they appeared like great white birds.
Ah.
All at once they sprang on one side, and the great sleigh stopped. The person who had driven it rose up, and the fur and the cap, which were made entirely of snow, fell off, and he saw a lady, tall and white. It was the Snow Queen.
Oh, shit.
She said to him,
"We have driven well, But why do you tremble so? Here, creep into my warm fur.
And then
my big old muff.
And then she seated him beside her in her sleigh, and she wrapped the fur about him, and he felt as if he were sinking into a snowdrift. She asked,
Are you still cold? Because the cold never bothered me anyway.
And then she kissed him on the forehead. The kiss was colder than ice, and it went through his heart, which was almost as a lump of ice already. He felt as if he were going to die, but only for a moment. He soon seemed quite well and did not notice the cold around him. Kay's first thought was,
My sledge! Don't forget my sledge!
But then he looked and saw that it was bound fast to one of the white birds which flew behind him. The Snow Queen kissed little Kay again, and by this time he had forgotten little Gerda, his grandmother,
creepy.
and all at home. The Snow Queen says to Kay,
Perhaps I have. It may be.
What?
What? Did I skip one? Oh, I see. Yeah. Now you must have no more kisses, or I should kiss you to death.
Kay looked at her. She was so beautiful. He could not imagine a more lovely face. She did not now seem to be made of ice, as when he had seen her through his window, and she nodded to him. In his eyes, she was perfect, and he did not feel at all afraid.
Jesus, cold.
He told her he could do mental arithmetics as far as fractions.
You want to hear a prayer? 4 times 3.
Wow. And that he knew the number of square miles and the number of inhabitants in the country. She smiled, and it occurred to him that she thought that he did not yet know so very much.
Yeah, I think he's boasting.
He looked around the vast expanse as she flew higher and higher with him upon the black cloud, while the storm blew and howled as if it were singing songs of olden times. They flew over the woods and the lakes and over the sea and land. Below them roared the wild wind, wolves howled and the snow crackled, and over them flew the black screaming crows, and above all shone in the moon, clear and bright. And so Kay passed through the long, long winter's night, and by day he slept at the feet of the Snow Queen. That's because you're just a fucking dog. Chapter 3.
Chapter 3.
I'm gonna hit this pen again.
Chapter 3. The Enchanted Flower Garden.
Thanks for saying it for me, bitch.
I spoiled it for you. You took too long. See what happens?
That is it.
Uh-huh.
How does it die? Is there a charging station for
I'm
it?
sure there is.
I thought it was one of those throwaway.
I don't know. There's a charger somewhere.
Damn.
There's always a charger somewhere.
Where would a charger be on this thing?
It's a magical screw-in charger.
Is it?
Yeah. I don't like them.
Oh, is it like one of... Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah.
That was an interesting pen. Sorry, I've never seen one like that. The Enchanted Flower Garden. But how fared little Gerda in Kay's absence? What had become of him? No one knew.
What about Gerda's side of the story?
Nor could anyone give the slightest information, except...
I thought you were going to say fuck. Nor could anyone give the slightest fuck, because he was kind of an asshole before he left.
Yeah, he was a genius. He can do arithmetics in his head.
He can do arithmetics. Yo, baby. Yo,
I know
I
what
got
2
those
plus
arithmetics.
2. I got your 2 plus 2 right here.
I know square miles and shit, girl.
I know how many people live in the countryside.
I know populations.
Okay. Excepting the boys, who had said that he had tied his sleigh to a very large one, which had been driven through the streets and out of the town gate. No one knew where it went. Many tears were shed for him, and little Gerda wept bitterly for a long time. She said she knew he must be dead, and that he was drowned in the river which flowed close by the school.
That's really specific. He was drowned in the river, and I don't actually have an alibi, but trust me, it wasn't me.
But it was for sure on the one by the school.
It was right by the school.
The long winter days were very dreary, but at last spring came with warm sunshine. Little Gerda says to the sun, Kay is dead and gone. And the sunshine says, I don't believe it.
Yeah, fuck you talking about?
Gerda says to the sparrows, He is dead and gone. They replied, We don't believe it. And at last little Gerda began to doubt it herself. One morning she says to herself, I will put on my new red shoes, those that Kay had never seen, and then I will go down to the river and ask for him. Just give me him back. Peace. It was quite early when she kissed her old grandmother, who was still asleep, and then she put on her little red shoes and went quietly alone, out of the town gate towards the river. Gerda says to the river, Is it true that you have taken my friend away from me? I will give you my red shoes if you will give him back.
Little did she know that the river was on its way to starting a modeling career, and those red shoes would change things forever.
What the fuck? And it seemed as if the waves nodded at her in a strange manner. Then she took off her red shoes, which she liked better than anything else, and threw them both into the river. But they fell near the bank, and the little waves carried them back into land, just as if the river would not take them from her. What she loved best, because it could not give her back little Kay. But she thought that the shoes had not been thrown out far enough, so she crept into a boat, and they lay amongst the reeds, and then she threw them again from the farther end of the boat into the water. But it was not fastened, and her movement sent it gliding away from land. When she saw this, she hastened to reach the end of the boat, but before she could do so, it was no more than a yard from the bank and drifting away faster than ever. Little Gerda was very much frightened. She began to cry, but no one heard her except for the sparrows, and they could not carry her to land, but they flew along by the shore and sang as if to comfort her.
Here
we are.
Let's watch her drown.
Like in her eyes. The boat floated with the stream, and little Gerda sat quiet, still, with only her stockings on her feet. The red shoots floated after her, but she could not reach them because the boat kept so much in advance. The banks on either side of the river were very pretty, and the beautiful flowers, old trees, sleeping fields, and the cows and sheep that were gazing, but not a human being to be seen. Wow. Gerda thought, Perhaps the river will carry me to Kay. And then she became more cheerful, and raised her head and looked at the beautiful green banks. And so the boat sailed on for hours, and at length she came to a large cherry orchard, in which stood a small house with the strange red and blue windows. It had a thatched roof, and outside were 2 wooden soldiers that presented arms, as if she were sailing past. Gerda called out to them, for she thought that they were alive, but of course they did not answer.
Because they were just wood.
And the boat drifted nearer to the shore. She saw what they really were. Then Gerda called out still louder, and there came a very old woman out of the house, leaning on a crutch. She wore a large hat and a shade, and a large hat to shade her from the sun. And on it were painted all sorts of pretty flowers.
Ooh, look at flowers.
The old woman says, You poor old child, how did you manage to come this way into the wide world on such a rapid rolling stream? And then the old woman walked into the water, seized the boat with her crutch and drew it to land, and lifted little Gerda out. And Gerda was glad to feel herself again on the dry ground, although she was rather afraid of the strange old woman. The old woman says, Come and tell me who you are and how you came to be here. Sorry. Gerda told her everything, while the old woman shook her head and said, And when Gerda had finished, she asked the old woman if she had seen little Kay. She told her that he had not passed that way, but he was very, very likely to come.
Sure, he'll be here any day. Did I mention he went missing a year ago? I bet he's just right behind you.
He's on his way. She told Gerda not to be sorrowful, but to taste the cherries and to look at the flowers. They were better than any picture book, for each of them could tell a story. Then she took Gerda by the hand and led her into the little house and closed the door. Oh, shit.
Uh-oh.
The windows were very high, and the panes were red and blue and yellow, and the daylight shone through them all in a sort of singular colors. On the table stood some beautiful cherries, and Gerda had permission to eat as many as she wanted. She wanted. While she was eating them, the old woman combed out her long hair, long flaxen ringlets, with a golden comb.
Just
and the glossy,
just combing out my flaxen ringlets over here.
And the glossy curls hung down on each side of the little round, pleasant face, which looked fresh and blooming as a rose.
Oh.
Wow, the detail for those things. The old woman says, I have long been wishing for a dear little girl like you. You must stay with me and see how happy we will be living together. And while she went on combing little Gerda's hair, the child thought less and less about her best friend Kay, for the old woman was an enchantress, and although she was not a wicked witch, she conjured only a little for her own amusement. And now, because she wanted to keep Gerda, therefore she went into the garden and stretched out her crutch towards all the rose trees, and beautiful as though they were, and they immediately sank into the dark earth, so that no one could tell where they had once stood. The old woman was afraid that if little Gerda saw the roses, that she would think of home and remember little Kay and run away.
I like to think about the way they described her witchcraft. It's like almost getting the true crime story going on, where it's like, before this, she had only committed misdemeanor witchery. But now she was getting ready to upgrade to a full felony.
Murder.
Kidnapping by witchcraft.
And murder. Then she took little Gerda into the flower garden. How fragrant and beautiful it was! Exclamation
mark. Yeah.
Every flower that could be thought of for every season of the year was here in full bloom. No picture book could have had more beautiful colors. Gerda jumped for joy and played till the sun went down behind the tall cherry trees. And then she slept in an elegant bed with red silk pillows embroidered with colored violets, and she dreamed as pleasantly as the queen on her wedding day.
Oh.
I know. That's not... I can't imagine that being a pleasant day.
She got drunk.
Yeah. Fuck, you have to.
Yeah.
You're marrying that guy?
Yeah.
The next day, for many years, or many days, excuse me, not many years, wow.
The next day, for many years.
The next day, and for many days after, Gerda played with the flowers in the warm sunshine. She knew every flower, and yet, although there were so many of them, it seemed as if one were missing. But what was it? She could not tell. One day, however, as she sat looking at the old woman's hat with the painted flowers on it, she saw that the prettiest of them all was a rose. The old woman had forgotten to take it from her hat when she made the roses sink into the earth. But it is difficult to keep the thoughts of everything together, and one little mistake upsets all the arrangements. So Gerda cries, What? Why are there no roses here?
Where's the roses? I want delicately explained, over-explained roses.
And then she ran out into the garden and examined all the beds and searched, but there was not one to be found.
Not one magnificent,
and then she sat down and wept, and her tears fell on just the place where that one of the rose trees had sunk down. The warm tears moistened the earth, and the rose tree sprung up at once, as blooming as when it had sunk. And Gerda embraced it and kissed the roses and got poked a lot.
Ow.
And although the beautiful roses and thought of the beautiful roses of home, and with them of little Kay. Gerda says, "Oh, how I've been deceived!" Exclamation mark. "I wanted to look for little Kay. Do you know where he is?" And she asked the roses, "Do you think he's dead?" And the roses answered, "No, he ain't dead. But we have been underground where all the dead lie. But Kay is not there."
We feed off the sustenance of the dead. That's why your tears satiated us so.
Gerda told them thanks, and then went to the other flowers and looked into their little cups and asked, "Do you know where little Kay is?" But each flower, as it stood in the sunshine, dreamed only of their own little fairy tale of history. Not one knew a thing about Kay. Gerda heard many stories from the flowers as she asked them one after the other about him.
So the earth is flat?
And then she ran over to the other end of the garden. The door was fastened, but she pressed against the rusty latch and it gave way. The door sprang open, and little Gerda ran out with her bare feet into the wide world. She looked back 3 times, but no one seemed to be following her. At last she could run no longer, so she sat down to rest on a great stone. And when she looked around, she saw the summer was over and autumn was very far in advance. She had known nothing of this in the beautiful garden where the sun shone and the flowers grew all year round. So she left just after fucking spring?
Yeah.
It's almost fucking autumn.
It's almost autumn. That lady kept her there for a while.
Sounds like it. Fuck. So Gerda says to herself, "Oh, now how I have wasted my time. It is autumn and I must not rest any longer." And so she rose to go on, but her little feet were wounded and sore, and everything around her looked cold and bleak. And the long willow leaves were quite yellow, and dewdrops fell like water. Leaf after leaf dropped from the trees.
Leaf.
And the sloe thorn alone still bore fruit, but the sloes were sour and set the teeth on edge. Oh, how dark and weary the whole world would appear.
That was quite the descriptor.
Yeah, this is an emo motherfucker, huh?
Yeah.
Chapter 4.
Chapter 4.
The Prince and the Princess. Gerda was obliged to rest again, and just opposite the palace where she sat, she saw a great crow come hopping towards her across the snow. He stood looking at her for some time, and then he wagged his head and said,
"Caw-caw! Good day, good day."
He pronounced the words as plainly as he could because he meant to be kind to the little girl. And then he asked her where she was going all alone in this wide world. The word alone. Sorry. Wow. Ah. Gerda understood very well and felt how much it expressed. So she told the crow the whole story of her life and adventures and asked him if he had seen little Kay. The crow nodded his head and very gravely and said,
"Perhaps I have. It may be. Crow."
The little Gerda cried, "No! Do you really think you have?" And she kissed the crow and hugged him almost to death with joy.
She kisses everything.
She's a little girl. The crow says,
Gently, gently. I believe I know. I think it may be little Kay, caw. But he has certainly forgotten you by this time for the princess.
Gerda asks him, "Does he live with the princess?" The crow replies,
"Crow! Yes, listen. It's difficult to speak your language. Do you know crow language? I can explain it better. Crow."
Little Gerda says, "No, I never learned it. But my grandmother understands it, and used to speak it to me. I wished I learned it." The crow answered,
"It doesn't matter. I will explain as best as I can, although it'll be badly done. Crow."
The crow continues to say,
In this kingdom, Crow, where we are now, there lives a princess who is wonderfully clever. Yet she has read all the newspapers in the world and forgotten them too, Crow. Although she is so clever. A short time ago, when she was sitting on her throne, which people say is not such an agreeable seat, Crow, as it is often supposed, she began to sing a song, which commences with these words, Crow, why should I not be married? Why not indeed, Crow? She would ask herself. And so she was determined to marry if she could find a husband who knew what to say when he was spoken to. And not one who could only look grand. For that grew tiresome, Crow.
She doesn't want some fucking Mariana.
Yeah. I don't want some... She doesn't want just some idiot. She wants some intellectual conversation.
When spoken to.
When spoken to. She assembled all of her court ladies at the best beat of the drum, and when they heard her intentions, they were very, very much pleased. Crow! They would say, oh, we are so glad to hear of it. We are talking about it ourselves the other day, Crow. You may believe that every word I tell you is true, for I have a tame sweetheart who hops freely about the palace, and she told me all this, Crow.
Of course, the sweetheart was a crow, for birds of a feather flock together.
Flock together.
That's also true. And one crow always chooses another crow.
I'm off to get crow punani.
The crow continues to say,
Crow! Newspapers were published immediately with the border of hearts and the initials of the princess among them. They gave notice that every young man who was handsome was free to visit the castle and speak with the princess, Crow. And those who could reply loud enough to be heard when spoken to were to make themselves at home at the palace. And the one who spoke the best would be chosen as a husband for the princess, Crow. The people came in crowds. There was a great deal of crushing and running about. At least 4 people died. But no one succeeded either on the first or the second day. They could all speak very well while they were outside in the streets. When they entered the palace gates, they saw the guards in silver uniforms, the footmen in the golden livery on the staircase, Crow. The great halls lighted up. They became quite confused for some reason.
I'm fucking confused. Bitch talking to a crow.
And when they stood before the throne on which the princess sat, they could do nothing but repeat the last word she had said, and she had no particular wish to hear her own words over again. It was just as if they had all taken something to make them sleepy while they were in the palace. Must have been that opium water we were passing out. Crow. Yeah. It was just yeah. But they did not recover themselves nor speak till they got back to the street. There was a long procession of them, reaching from the town gate to the palace. I myself went there to see them, Crow. They were hungry and thirsty, for at the palace they did not even get a glass of water. They were all high.
One of them was on LSD.
They were puffing on something that made them feel insecure when they got in there. They didn't want to talk. They just shut down. Got 2 in their own heads, and then they're all got the munchies and cotton mouth.
We vape a lot of marijuana in here. We just burn it as incense.
Yeah. Some of the wisest had taken a few slices of bread and butter with them, but they did not share it with their neighbors. They thought if the others went to the princess looking hungry, it would be a better chance for themselves, Crow.
Gerda interrupted, saying, But Kay, tell me about little Kay. Was he amongst the crowd? The crow says,
Shut the fuck up and don't you interrupt a crow. I was just coming to that part. Just took me a while to get around. I like to tell the whole story, not just part of it, so calm your shit down.
I'm sorry.
It was on the third day that they came marching cheerfully along to the palace. A little person without a horse or carriage. His eyes were sparkling like yours, Crow. He had beautiful long hair, but his clothes were very poor.
Gerda was full of joy and clapped her hands, saying, "That's Kay! Oh, then I must have found him."
I said, calm down.
The crow added.
He had a little knapsack on his back.
Little Gerda says, "No, it must have been his sleigh, for he left with it." The crow says,
It may have been so. I did not look at it very closely, but I know from my tame sweetheart that he passed through the palace gates. Saw the guards in the silver uniforms and the servants in the liveries of gold. On the stairs, Crow was not in the least embarrassed. It must be very tiresome to stand on the stairs. I prefer to go in, Crow. The rooms were blazing with light. Counselors and ambassadors walking about with bare feet, carrying golden vessels. It was enough to make anyone feel serious. Crow. His boots creaked loudly as he walked, and yet he was not at all uneasy.
Gerda says, "It must be Kay. I know he had new boots on. I heard them creak in his grandmother's room." The crow continues to say,
Oh, they really did creak. Yet when he went boldly up to the princess herself, who was sitting on a pearl as large as a spinning wheel, she's weird like that, don't ask questions.
I was trying to lay an egg.
And all the ladies of the court were present with the maids and all the cavaliers and the servants, and the maids had another maid to wait upon her. The cavaliers' servants had their own servants, as well as any page. A page, each had a page. Crow! They all stood in circles around the princess. The nearer they stood to the door, the prouder they looked. The servants' pages, who always wore the little slippers, could hardly be looked at. They helped themselves up so proudly by the door. Crow.
Little Gerda says, "It must be quite awful, but did Kay win the princess?" The crow says,
Well, don't tell my crow girlfriend that I keep talking about, but if I hadn't been a crow, I would have hit it myself. Although I am engaged, Crow. He spoke as well as I do when I speak the crow's language. I heard this from my tame sweetheart that I get it on with all the time in the castle.
I guess so.
Yeah, he was quite free and agreeable, and said he did not come to woo the princess, but to hear her wisdom, Crow. And he was as pleased with her as she was with him, Crow.
Gerda says, "Oh, certainly sounds like Kay. He is so clever. He could work mental arithmetics and fractions. Oh, will you take me to this place?" The crow says,
Crow! It's very easy to ask, but how will we manage it? Crow. I will speak about it to my tame sweetheart that I told you about, and ask her advice. For I must tell you, it will not be very difficult to gain permission.
It will be.
It will be very difficult. Let me rephrase that. It'll be the opposite of what I said. It will be very difficult for a little girl like you to enter the palace, Crow.
Gerda says, "Oh, yes, but I shall gain permission easily. For when Kay hears that I am here, he will come out and fetch me in immediately."
Immediately.
The crow says,
Wait for me here by the palings. We shall see. Crow. Off to get some crow puss.
The crow wagged his head and he flew away.
Oh, yeah.
It was late in the evening before the crow returned. He said,
Caw, she sends you a greeting. Whew, I'm exhausted. Crow, and there's the little roll which she took from the kitchen for you. There's plenty of bread there, and she thinks you must be hungry, Crow. It's not possible for you to enter the palace by the front entrance. The guards in silver uniform and the servants in gold liveries would not allow it. But do not cry, Crow. We will manage to get you in. My sweetheart knows a little back staircase that leads to the sleeping apartments. She knows where to find the key, Crow.
Then they went into the garden, through the great avenue, where the leaves were falling one after another, and they could see the lights in the palace being put out in the same manner. And the crow led little Gerda to the back door, which stood ajar. Oh, how her heart beat with anxiety and longing. It was as if she were going to do something wrong, yet she only wanted to know where little Kay was. Gerda thought, it must be him, with those clear eyes and that long hair. She could fancy she saw him smiling at her as he used to at home when they sat amongst the roses. He would certainly be glad to see her and hear what a long distance she had come for his sake, and to know how sorry they had all been at home because he did not come back. Oh, what a joy, and yet what fear she felt. They were now on the stairs, and the small closet at the top of the lamp was burning, and in the middle of the floor stood a tamed crow, turning her head from side to side and gazing at Gerda, who curtsied as her grandmother had taught her to do.
Curtsy.
The tamed crow said, My betrothed has spoken very highly of you, my lady. Your story is very touching. Crow.
Crow.
If you will take my lamp, I will fly before you, Crow. We will go straight along this way, and then we shall meet no one. Gerda says, I feel as if somebody were behind us. And something rushed by her like a shadow on the wall. And then it seemed to her that horses were with flying manes and thin legs, hunters, ladies, and gentlemen on horsebacks guided by her like shadows.
Shadow.
The tame crow says, They are only dreams. They are coming to carry the thoughts of the great people out hunting, Crow. All the better, for their thoughts are out hunting. We shall be able to look for them in their beds more safely, Crow.
And we'll kill them in their sleep.
I hope that you will rise to honor your favorite, show a grateful heart, that you may be quiet, sure of that, Crow. They now came to the first hall, and the walls in which were hung with rose-colored satin embroidered with artificial flowers. Wow. Here, the dreams again filtered by them, but so quickly that Gerda could not distinguish the royal persons. Each hall appeared more splendid than the last. It was enough to bewilder one. At length they reached a bedroom. The ceiling was like a great palm tree with glass leaves made of the costliest crystal. Say that one 3 times.
The costliest crystal.
And over the center of the floor were 2 beds, each resembling a lily, hung from a stem of gold, and one in which the princess lay was white, and the other was red. And in this Gerda had to seek for little Kay. She pushed one of the red leaves aside and saw a little brown neck. Oh, that must be Kay, she thought. She called his name loudly and held the lamp over him, and the dreams rushed back into the room on horseback, and he awoke and turned his head around. This was not little Kay. The prince was only like him. Still, he was young and pretty, but not Kay. Out of her white lily bed peeped the princess, and asked what was the matter. Little Gerda wept and told her story, and all that the crows had done to help her. The prince and the princess both say, You poor child.
Oh, you poor child.
And then they praised the crows.
Poor child.
Oh, you poor child.
Poor child.
Then they praised the crows and said that they were not angry with them for what they had done, but that it must definitely not happen again. And for this one time, they should be rewarded.
We're cool that you got us here.
I didn't reword that. That was part of it.
It's cool that you took good care of us, but can you guys stop making eye contact with us while you're boning and telling us about your romantic relationship?
The princess asked the crows, "What would you like to have your freedom? Or would you prefer to be raised in the portions of court crows with all that has been left in the kitchen for yourselves?"
Her accent changed.
The princess.
Oh, it's the princess. That's right. I see.
Sorry, I didn't give you shit. Then both the crows bowed and begged to have fixed apartments, for they thought of their old age, and it would be so comfortable, they said, to feel that they had made a provision for it. And then the prince got out of his bed and gave it up to Gerda. He could do no more. And then she lay down, she folded her little hands and thought, "How good everybody is to me, both humans and animals." And then she closed her eyes and fell into a sweet sleep. All the dreams came flying back again to her, looking like angels now, and one of them drew a little sleigh on which sat little Kay, who nodded to her. But all of this was only a dream, and it vanished as soon as she awoke. The following day she dressed from head to foot in silk and velvet, and invited to stay at the palace for a few days to enjoy herself. But she only begged for a pair of boots and a little carriage and a horse to draw it, so that she might go out into the big world and look for Kay. Sorry. And she obtained not only the boots, but a muff. And was
big old bush.
No, a muff is that hand thing.
Sure.
And was neatly dressed. And when she was ready to go, there at the door she found a coach made of pure gold and a coat of arms of the prince and the princess shining upon it like a star. And then the coachman and a footman and outriders all wearing gold crowns upon their heads. The prince and the princess themselves helped her into the coach and wished her success. The forest crow, who now was married, accompanied her for the first 3 miles.
I like how we're getting this whole side story with the crow.
But he sat by Gerda's side, as he could not bear riding backwards. The tamed crow stood in the doorway, flapping his wings, sorry. He could not go with them. Sorry. The tame crow, stood in the doorway, flapping her wings. She could not go with them because she had been suffering from a headache ever since the new appointment, but no doubt from overeating. The coach was so well stored with sweet cakes.
The crow's going. He's like, "Listen, we moved into that apartment together. Everything has gone downhill since. I need to get out."
It's only been 3 days.
She's just stuck in the doorway. Howdy!
And under the seat were fruits and gingerbread nuts. The prince and the princess cried out to Gerda, saying, "Farewell!
Farewell!"
And little Gerda wept, and the crow wept. And then after a few miles, the crow said, "Farewell."
Farewell!
And this was the parting even more sad. However, he flew to a tree and stood flapping his black wings as long as he could see the coach, which glittered like a sunbeam.
That was good. That was pretty good.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think we'll call this part 1 of the Snow Queen.
Aww. All right.
We'll come back and we'll finish it on our next episode. Hope you folks have been enjoying it. It's been real fun. Been having a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Like we said in the beginning, Hans Cristian Anderson.
It's just about to get good, too.
Shit's about to go down.
Like, you guys are going to love the next
So get ready for the next episode.
Check it out next week.
We'll give you the spoilers. It'll start with a chapter called The Little Robber Girl.
That's all we're leaving you with.
That's all we're leaving you with.
All right. Check us out everywhere.
Yeah. Like, subscribe, share us with your friends.
Comment.
Yeah.
Give me something.
Give me something.
I'm just going to fucking keep doing my own thing then.
Chisel our name out of ice.
I guess I've done most stories, so you can't really fucking give me anything, can you?
Yeah. No.
Thanks,
Let us know if you want anything.
Yeah.
But yeah, have a good night, everybody.
Good night.